Hello, everyone. I'm Irma Baker. Welcome to our show. It's so good to have you with us. And this is a kind of unique show today because it's actually part two of a show that we previously broadcast and that's still available. You know that you can find these shows by going to watchwctv.com. And I hope if you missed part one that you will go back and find it. And now today we are bringing you part two. Our guest is Fritz Kungl. He is a local resident and has a story that is very timely, even though it happened almost 80 years ago. He is a survivor of World War II, of the camps and of the conflict, much like the conflict that's going on right now in Ukraine. So, Fritz, welcome back for part two, and it's just great to have you with us.
It's nice to be here. Nice to be
now,
here.
When we were talking last time, we were talking about your family's decision to leave Yugoslavia. You are of German heritage, but you were born and raised in Yugoslavia as a German Yugoslav, just like we have Italian Americans, we have Polish Americans, we have Irish Americans, we have Asian Americans. You were German Yugoslavians. And that created problems between where you belonged in terms of all the countries around you and the conflict that was going on. This is actually what we're talking about, the very end of World War II.
Yes.
But as we find out from talking with you, it was not the end of the hard times for people like yourselves of German heritage in Europe. So welcome back, and tell us now, when we left you last time, your family had decided to go back. And this is your mom, your three sisters, your younger brother, and you. And your father had been off. He had been drafted. And so your family now is getting back together. And your mom really, really wanted to go back to your village in Yugoslavia. What happened? How did you get there? And what was it like?
Well, this is the period that I want to talk about because it's somewhat unique. I know that all the ethnic Germans went probably through the same thing as we did. I mean, they lost their homes and they wound up either in Austria or Germany. But in 1945, after the war was over, everybody decided, or everybody thought, they could go back home. Okay, whether it was to Hungary or to Yugoslavia in our case. And I understand that most of them tried. So did we, and especially my mom. My mom was determined to go back because she thought that going back to Yugoslavia, their home, would be better than being in Austria or Germany. So we were told, even by the Russians, okay, you don't belong here, why don't you go back to Yugoslavia where you belong? Now, and one of the reasons was probably because, like I said, my older sister, especially my older sister, she could read the Russian language. So she had no problem actually communicating with the Russians. And of course, the Russians not only told us to go back to Yugoslavia, they supplied the equipment. They took it from the Austrians and gave it to us. I mean, yeah. And that made it possible for us to go back. So now we all set. Mom is determined to go back, okay? So we traveled about, I would say maybe 25 kilometers and the first night. And we stopped to spend the night.
Let me ask you, how were you traveling? Were you in cars? Were you on trains? Were you walking? What were you doing?
We were on a wagon. The wagon was pulled by 2 oxen. Yeah, so it was a slow trip. because they're slow. They're slow animals. They're strong, but not too fast. But that was it. A covered wagon, just like you see in the Old West, and only ours was pulled by oxen. And there were 3 more wagons. They had horses, but our wagon was pulled by oxen. But so everybody had to follow us or go as slow as we did. Yeah, so we took off. I mean, we went off. We took about, like I said, maybe 25 kilometers, and we stayed overnight. And that first night, I should have told my mom not to go any further, but that's not the case. The first thing that happened is that the Russian soldiers, and now we're still in Austria, that the Russian soldiers were looking for women. And during the war, just like right now we hear in Ukraine, that women were raped. And as a 10-year-old, I really didn't know what it meant. I know there was something bad and something done to women, because every time it was mentioned, they would run for cover or they would go and hide someplace. But this was the same thing. The evening came, the first night, and 2 of the Russian soldiers approached the wagon where my oldest sister was sitting, cradling my youngest brother, pretending that he is her child. So the Russians would go up to the wagon and they start crying and screaming, so they didn't climb the wagon. But they didn't stop looking. They kept on looking, and they found my youngest sister, who was hiding under a wagon between older ladies. And when they lifted the blanket, she pretended to be a little child. She was 14, and it worked. They said she is too young, and it was also dark, so they really couldn't see it. And they didn't touch her. So my third sister was hiding in a wagon close where my mom was standing by the wagon. But they couldn't see my sister, but they did see my mom, and I was with my mom. And of course, the Russian soldier reached for my mom. But before he could get to her, I would grab her. And of course I started crying, and then the next thing I could feel his hand in my face. He had slapped me with a backhand, and I could feel the blood running from my nose and mouth, but I didn't let go. And of course the harder he tried to pull me away from my mom, the tighter I held on, and I wouldn't let go. And actually, I told her many times, I said, you know, Mom, it didn't hurt. It didn't hurt. He didn't get to you. So that was the first night, and we should have stopped right there. But my mom was determined to go back, so she kept on going. She said, whatever, we're going to go back. Now, the unusual thing about this part is, what happened to us, is there were 18 in the group, in that caravan, or that show, 18 of us. And now the next day, we crossed the border into Yugoslavia. I didn't know when or where, but I did know that we are now in Yugoslavia, and we are in the merciless hands of Marshal Tito. He was determined to eradicate all the Germans, and he did. He did, one way or the other. But we kept on going, and I tried to ask, why did we make it, and 90% of the people never did? But once they did, they never came back. They either died over there in Croatia, or they wound up in concentration camps. Why we never wound up in concentration camps, I don't know. We went through them, but never stayed in them. So I asked my older cousin, I said, how come we made it and you didn't? Why was it so different? Why could we make it? The only answer he had, he said, I think what happened in your case, you were the first ones to go, and they were not organized. They didn't know really what was going on. So that's the only explanation he had, which may be true or not. But we kept on going, and we're now in Yugoslavia. And of course, we didn't know where we were going except in that direction because this is where our home would be. And whenever we get to any kind of a town or city, the partisans, that's what we called Tito's soldiers, they would rummage our wagon, take whatever they felt like, and let us go. And we did travel. Of course, now all it was is walking and begging, because we had to walk, because we had to beg for food. And it was difficult because the people we begged from, they didn't have anything either. At that time, Yugoslavia, they were desperate just like everybody else. But we begged. We begged and we walked, and we begged and we walked. Now, don't ask me how long it took us, but about 80 kilometers from our home, we were told to go into a big yard, an open area. We drove in there. They told us to get off the wagon, and once we got off, they wouldn't let us go back. So whatever we had on our body, that was our whole possession. We had nothing.
So
except
you
what we had
had
body.
things that you had left on the wagon when they told you to get off, but you weren't allowed back on the wagon, and you weren't allowed to get any of your things from the wagon.
There was a woman who had a little baby, and she asked for a pillow to wrap the baby in, and they wouldn't even give her that. So yeah, so whatever we had, that was it. And of course, here, the next thing, of course, they asked us to line up, to form a line. And that's the reason why I know there were 18, because when we were lined up, I counted them. I was the last one in line, and I counted them, and there were 18 of us. And when the communist officer over there turned to the enlisted men and said, go and get the rifle in Croatia, which I understood, I was the last one in the line, only about maybe 10 feet from the gate leading out. And when he turned and said, go and get the rifle, I ran out the door. I left my family, and I ran out the door because I was sure that they're going to kill us. I was sure this was the end. And I guess I wasn't ready to die, so I just ran out the door. I don't know why, because here I am at 11 now, in a strange, harmful environment. I mean, where am I going to go as an 11-year-old? And of course, I went to my aunt. Another thing, went to my aunt, who was allowed to go because her married name was Gostelensky, which was not a German name. So she was allowed to go, while all the rest of us, we were not. We had to, We didn't hear any shots, so my aunt says, well, why don't you go back? Because she didn't know what to do with me either. So I went back, and I found the family and the rest of the people in a building a little bit removed from the main compound over there, up in the attic. And we spent the night in that attic. And the next day, we were loaded on a wagon, and we wound up at a river. I don't know how long it took us, but we now at the river. The idea was that to cross the river into Hungary, and when we get to Hungary, we would be sent to Russia as slave labor. So we are at the river, and we are waiting for some kind of a barge or ferry or any kind of transportation to cross the river. But the transportation never came. So in the meantime, the partisan told my sister, who was on the wagon, and this is my stubborn sister, and she was really stubborn. She did not believe in anything that they did, because she did not go begging like we did, because I'd rather die than beg. That was my sister. So the Russian, the partisan, he told us, why don't you go and take a swim? And she looked at him and said, if you want to kill me, you have to do it where I stand. I'm not going to go and take a swim. But he didn't. He didn't kill her. He didn't force her to go and take a swim because she said, that's it. I mean, I'm not going to go take a swim. If you want me dead, kill me. So that was the first day. Now we're free. The barge didn't come, or the transportation to cross the river didn't come. So they said, now you can go. So I said, well, where are we going to go? Well, you can go home if you want to. So we did. We walked the next 80 kilometers. Now we have nothing now. I mean, we are whatever we had on our body. And the unusual thing, my mom, she said, well, don't change any of your clothing because once we get home, we're going to put it on a pile and burn it. Well, it didn't work out that way. After a few days, and here again, I don't know how long it took us to walk the 80 kilometers, which probably is around 60 miles. We're home. We're now in our village. But the home is not ours. It belonged to a woman, and it was given to her by Marshal Tito. So my sisters, my mom, and my brother stayed with that woman in our house. Not our house, but it was our house. And I stayed with neighbors across the street who were relatives, didn't have to go or leave because their daughter married a high communist official. But they should have left too, but they didn't. So I stayed with them. And according to my sister, I don't remember, like I said, I don't remember the time. I don't remember the days. I don't remember the months. Period. I'm just there. She said we stayed at home about 6 weeks. After 6 weeks, now all of a sudden we're in a camp. Again, don't ask me how we got there because I don't know. I don't know what kind of transportation. I don't know who put us there. Now we're in a camp. People are already there. People are already there in that camp. So I was sitting there this one day and in a circle with other kids talking, probably childish things, and I looked across and I saw my sister, my stubborn sister, tied to a telephone pole. I didn't make anything of it because she always was in trouble. That was my rebel sister. She did, didn't pay any attention. I mean, okay, so what? So she's tied to a telephone pole, big deal, And I found out later on that she was asked to pick herbs to make tea for the camp commander, and she refused. She said, I'm not going to pick him. I mean, that was her. I'm not going to pick. Why? I don't like them. I don't like who they are. I don't like the people. I'm not doing it. And as punishment, she was tied to a telephone pole and had to look in the sun for 4 hours. That was one part of it. The next part, I looked to the right of me. I saw these people walking. And I said, why would these people walk in a circle? They just kept on walking. I said, why are they walking? I mean, they don't look strong enough to walk. They should, what's going on? I mean, why are they walking? Why? They kept on walking. It seemed like day and night. And here again, I found out later on that it was a toilet facility, but the only thing that they had was a hole with a log across it, so that people would walk and kind of hope for empty spots so they can take the spot, and that's why they kept on walking. So there was another, but it didn't affect me. I mean, I looked at all that stuff and I said, gee, I have nothing to do with it. Why worry about it? I'm sure my mom and they felt a little bit different than I. I was a child, 10 years old, 11. Why would I care? The camp, we did get food. And that's the reason why I don't think at that time it was still not considered a concentration camp. Because we did get food and we stayed there, I don't know for how long. And the camp commander, or somebody over there, looked for people to work. And before I go that, sleeping accommodations in that camp. It was a bare boards slanted where the head was higher than the feet, but there was nothing there, just boards. And to make it a little bit more comfortable, if that's what you want to call it, I remember my mom, who had that torn, old, smelly dress on, put it away as far as she could from her body, so that my brother and I have at least something to lay on top. So that was the sleeping thing. Now, my sister volunteered us to go to work. But there were 4 women, and my brother and I, he was 6 and I was 11, or he now 7 and I 11. We were not the ideal workforce. We didn't qualify. Divine intervention, want to call it whatever you want to. We weren't killed when we were lined up. The barge didn't show up to take us to Russia. Now we're going to work and we can't work. A young man from our village, somehow he was just going in that camp or whatever, and my sister looked at him and we called her attention, and she turned to my mom and she said, "Mom, from now on, this young man is your son." Could be, because we had nothing on it. We had no papers. Nobody could identify us one way or the other. We could be anybody, you know. So, okay, so whenever they looked for the workers, we said, okay, now here's our new adopted son, our brother and my mother's son. We qualified for the workforce. So the following day, we left the camp. The only other thing that I remember about that camp is there was a first time on the way out that I actually saw a dead human being. And the only reason I remember that is because it didn't look human. It looked, to me, yellowish. I mean, it was not, anyway. But that was the only dead body I saw, although my sister told me that a lot of the German prisoners, if they couldn't march fast enough, they would shoot them and leave them there. But I only saw that once, so I didn't. So we go to work, because we didn't know where we were going to go. And on the way to work, wherever that was, we wound up in another camp. And we only stayed there one night, and I think the following day we kept on going. But that particular night or evening, I looked at the direction over there, and I saw a tree. Now, of all the things that I should have looked at or seen or remembered, a tree. Now, why would I remember a tree? Why? Well, what's so special about the tree? It's just a tree right beside what looked like a guardhouse. I'm looking at that thing. Why am I looking at that tree? What's so fascinating? Looked at that tree, finally realized that there were no leaves on it. And I said, now why does that tree have a leaf? This is summer. Now it's summertime. I know it's summertime because we're going to go to a farm and work. And of course I found out later on that the men in the camp, they would pick the leaves and smoke them. So that's the reason why I was fascinated or caught my eye. I said, why would I even look at that tree? Looking a little bit beyond that, I could see heavy trucks. And I was told that these trucks were used to transport the corpses to the last destination, which was a mass grave. And we were also told that on the average, 50 people died daily. So, but see, at that time, we still didn't know that it was a concentration camp or a death camp. We didn't stay long enough to find out. I mean, we so it may have been, and later on, I'm sure it was a concentration, but by that time, it was still not that. People were there. There were some people there. So we were not the only ones. There were people there, people in the first camp, people in this camp. But we never stayed long enough to really find out. Now, we are at the place where we're supposed to work. We get there, it was a building, a square building, one room, straw against the wall, which was our bedding for the next, I understand, 6 weeks. My sisters and mom, they went to work with that adopted brother and son. They went to work. I didn't see too much of them because they would leave in the morning and come back at night or in the evening, so I really didn't see too much of them. And my brother and I think we did some work, I don't know. One of them I know that we did. We had to watch the cabbage field so that animals won't eat the cabbage, but that was the work that we did. After the work was done, which I take it was harvesting, because this now is end of summer, beginning of fall, they told us that now that the work is done, the harvesting is finished, we're going to go back home. You would think by now that everybody would, cheer and do something because we're going back home, but nobody did. And I think what happened, because of so many other disappointments, nobody really thought about, getting excited over it.
By then, home was no longer home, and you were fortunate to be able to have relatives over here in Akron who eventually were able to bring you here.
Right.
I hope that we can come back sometime and hear some more of your story.
Yeah.
It has certainly been a trip for us to go back to see what you and your family endured over that time, which technically was after the war was over.
Yes.
So thank you, Fritz, so much for being with us, and I hope we'll be able to talk again sometime.
Yeah, it was a
and
pleasure.
thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in today. For RSVP, I'm Irma Baker.
You are watching WCTV, Wadsworth Community Television.